Mountains have fascinated and terrified man for thousands of years. The thrill of facing the fear, of exploring and conquering the unknown, has brought both triumph and tragedy. Most of all, it has given man a glimpse of life from the top of the world. Mountains were once perceived as inaccessible, the territory of gods and demons. But since the 1800s, man has systematically set about conquering every one of the world's peaks. With each conquest, man's perceptions of his own limits has broadened, encouraging him to take on ever harder and higher challenges. One man in particular has taken it upon himself to discover just what our limits are. 43-year-old Italian mountaineer Marino Giacometti has spent the last 10 years of his life breaking ascent and descent records on some of the world's highest mountains. His conquests include the Himalayan peak of Pumori in 14 hours, the alpine summits of Mont Blanc in under 7, and Monte Rosa in under 4. Giacometti's feats inspired him to embark on the Peak Performance Project, involving mountain runners from all over the world in a series of high-altitude events. The aptly named Sky Runners are steadily pushing back the physical and psychological limits of sport as they take it to unprecedented heights.
The principal motivation has always been the same: to run in the most beautiful places on Earth and to find an answer to the question, what are the limits to which a human can run? By pushing the human body in extreme situations, we aim to discover to what extent we can draw on our resources. The pleasure of running in this sort of location gives an additional force to our project and to the athletes who feel that much more inspired.
This unique project has seen the rise of an extremely specialized breed of sportsman and woman. Sky runners must be able to compete at altitudes of up to 15,000 feet, often over extreme terrain and covering distances up to or exceeding the 26-mile marathon.
Molla la corda, segui giù il canalino lì che qua sotto c'è il buco.
In some extreme cases, these runners appear to possess muscular and physiological modifications which could lead a doctor examining them for the first time to believe they are actually sick. But obviously they're not. They simply represent an extreme condition of normality reached through highly rigorous physical exercise and an intensive training regime.
The core of this elite group includes Adriano Greco, Italy's mountain running and ski touring champion, who holds the record for the fastest ascent and descent of Europe's highest peak, Mont Blanc, at just over 7 hours. Greco's wife, Bruna Fanetti, the only woman to have run up and down Mont Blanc in 10 hours, 43 minutes. Fabio Maraldi, a mountain guide who with Greco has won the prestigious Pierramenta ski touring race a record 5 times. He also holds the record for the fastest ascent and descent of Europe's second highest peak, Monte Rosa, in an astonishing and probably unbeatable time of 4 hours 24 minutes. Gisela Bendotti, the female record holder for the ascent and descent of Monte Rosa in 5 hours 34 minutes. American Matt Carpenter, 4-time winner and record holder for the Pikes Peak Marathon in Colorado, is also the first man to have run a full marathon at a height of 14,000 feet in under 3 hours. In all, athletes who've been involved in the Sky Marathons have come from over 10 countries and 4 continents. They have a wide variety of backgrounds, but all of them have one passion in common: the mountains.
When I run, I try to draw on whatever surrounds me, all the natural sources of energy that exist. Everything around you on a mountain is living and breathing. When I'm on the mountain, there's a smell in the air of the earth and the ice and the glacier, which is constantly changing. It's this that fills me with a kind of life and energy when I race.
Natural inspiration is not hard to come by, as the Skyrunners compete in some of the most spectacular locations on Earth, from the imposing Himalayas and Tibetan Plateau to the American Rockies, the European Alps, and the snows of equatorial Africa.
The scenery is really fantastic. Whenever the pain gets too much, you just look up and you get the inspiration you need to keep going.
The project is supported by Italian sports shoe and clothes manufacturer Fila, who are developing footwear and sportswear particularly suited to the extreme conditions met by the Skyrunner. On-site support is provided by a team of highly specialized doctors, researchers, and psychologists who carefully monitor the athletes every step of the way. They provide a scientific record to this running revolution, and in so doing are spearheading a revolution of their own in sports medical history.
There has been
a dramatic evolution in sport due to a greater knowledge of human capabilities and to the natural evolution of technology in clothing, shoes and so on. But I think we are still very far from discovering the limit to these more extreme performances. We can still go a lot further. Whilst we all know the world record for the marathon or the 100 meters, we still have no idea as to the potential that exists for performances at altitude. It is our job to try to discover just how far we can go and just what the human limits are in this sport.
The first time a marathon was run on the Tibetan Plateau at 14,000 feet, Dr. Sergio Roy of Italy's Marathon Centre headed an investigation to determine the optimum preparation time needed for such a race and the energy expenditure, dehydration, muscular fatigue and hormone changes brought on by the stress of competing at altitude. Whilst acclimatization is all important, the more time spent at extreme altitude, the more likely you are to suffer from muscle depletion. Timing is crucial, and careful calculations must be made to reach a level of optimum acclimatization before the negative factors have a chance to impair performance. Research starts in Tibet with the Cooper test, an experiment to determine the athlete's aerobic threshold. Wearing heart monitors and running 400-meter laps over 12 minutes, Dr. Roy determines an optimum heart rate for each athlete during the race.
158.
Racing at 14,000 feet is not a challenge many athletes would choose to experience. Whilst oxygen levels remain constant, air pressure is almost halved, affecting heart and lung efficiency and reducing aerobic power by up to 40%. Air is exceedingly dry, and rehydration a major problem for the runner, who must humidify up to 100% of the air breathed. During the race, athletes were found to have lost up to 4 pounds of weight, almost exclusively represented by water loss. The day belongs to Carpenter, who crosses the line in just over 3 hours, becoming the first man to have run a marathon distance at such an altitude. It's a record he'll go on to break a year later when he completes the course in 2 hours 56.
This is incredible. Everybody's all smiles, and you know it's such a great event that Phil has put on here to come over here and see a new country, and you know nothing couldn't have worked out any better.
In 1994, at the base of the Matterhorn in Cervinia, 50 athletes set off at 1-minute intervals to attempt the first vertical kilometre from a starting height of 2,000 metres. As the runners compete at their maximum aerobic threshold over such a specific distance and vertical climb, the race would give the research team a scientific base from which to determine man's peak performance at altitude. The finishing time of 40 minutes was a surprise to everyone, over 5 minutes faster than had been predicted. Another major test at Cervinia was for the presence of a protein in the blood known as troponin, an indicator of the amount of stress experienced by the heart under the extreme conditions of the course.
We try to use these tests to give us some sort of reference point from which we can determine when it would be helpful for an athlete to take precautions and slow down. The great advantage of these particular tests is that as samples can be analysed on site, we can obtain results from the athletes immediately after the race. And if the troponin levels are high, it would indicate their limit of endurance has been exceeded. We can then judge just what their limits are in terms of the intensity and number of endurance performances they can sustain without causing permanent physical damage.
The tests bring good news for the sky runners. None of the athletes tested positive for troponin, and results appear to confirm that there's no permanent damage to the heart following such strenuous endurance events. Monte Rosa, a 4,600-meter peak in the Italian Alps, Europe's second highest mountain. The Sky Marathon, a 29-kilometer course open to anyone strong enough to attempt it, covers an extreme vertical climb of 3,400 meters of rock and glacier. As descent is immediate, acclimatization is not a factor in the alpine events, but the problems that do exist are no less acute.
You must be able to isolate yourself from all the other runners and not be influenced by what they're doing. It's a long race, you can get ahead of people, and then they can overtake you. But you've got to concentrate on your race. If you start worrying about what other people are doing, it can be very risky. There are too many other uncontrollable elements. The length of the race, the extreme terrain, the altitude. If you stop thinking for a moment about any one of them, you're done for. It's my opinion that the psychological force of the runner is more important here than in any other race.
It is the importance of the runner's psychological state over such demanding courses which has led to medical tests being complemented by an in-depth investigation into just how an athlete's performance is limited by their psychological makeup.
But the field of the attention is not only here. Questi atleti.
You have to realize that these athletes are not, as it were, fully developed in terms of their psychological preparation. They have a lot of potential and a lot of natural ability, but they haven't yet developed their level of optimum performance. They are still quite naive in this area of their running. So we need to discover just what it takes to guide them through the particular stresses and demands placed on them by this kind of race.
300 meters from the summit, the strain is beginning to show, and an athlete's mental strengths become ever more crucial. Meraldi reaches the summit in a record 3 hours 14 minutes, beating the previous time by a full 18 minutes. Plunging off the edge, he descends the first 40-degree 100-meter drop in an astounding 30 seconds. It's this sort of mental attitude and courage which defines the winners of sky marathons.
My descent was a bit reckless, I have to admit. I just threw myself down the slope, sliding on my bum. But that's how you manage to put some distance between yourself and the others. On the snowy bits, I tried to push myself as hard as I could, and wherever I could, I'd slide on my backside. When the snow finished, that wasn't so easy, but I tried to come down in as straight a line as possible over the rocks and grass. I tore my trousers, but that's not a problem. I just hope the organisers buy me another pair.
As skyrunning gains in momentum, Giacometti now has strong hopes for a federation of high-altitude sport. But in the meantime, the skyrunning team continue to set their sights on new challenges over unconquered terrain. And what could be more in keeping with the spirit of skyrunning than a full marathon up Africa's second highest mountain, Mount Kenya, a journey that would take an accomplished mountaineer 2 days. The athletes face a total vertical climb of 7,100 feet through forest, over rock, tundra, treacherous scree and ice, before finally reaching Lanana Point at 16,355 feet. The terrain proves to be one of the most problematic aspects of the race, and coupled with the effects of altitude, for which this mountain is particularly notorious, Mount Kenya becomes one of the toughest challenges the sky runners have endured. The final stretches of the climb get progressively worse as thick scree impedes the athlete's way. Hard-packed glacial snow, usually tackled with the aid of crampons, ropes and ice picks, proves the ultimate test.
It really is very, very hard. I've never seen anything like this race before. When I reached the start of the steep climb in the snow, I was lying in second, but it didn't look possible to go any further. Then these funny runners came, running with their strange sticks, and some were going up on their hands and knees. I tried to follow them, but kept falling over. In the end, I had to crawl.
Matt Carpenter becomes the first man ever to have reached the summit in under 3.5 hours. Getting down may sound easier, but it's a terrifying 800-meter drop to the end of the section of snow and scree. Moraldi flies down the glacier, once again by the seat of his pants, to gain the lead from Carpenter. In finishing first, he sets another potentially unbreakable record of 5 hours, 3 minutes. Giacometti's Skyrunners are successfully transforming what was once seen as exclusive territory for gods and goblins into a playground for one of the world's youngest, most exciting and most challenging sports. The only question now is, how much further and how much faster can they go?